Welcome, everyone, to our second podcast on our series of 5 on performance management and raising the bar on performance management. On this occasion, we are going to talk about taking your performance conversation to the next level. So we are going to try to determine what are the elements and the structures of a conversation that every leader should have with their employees. And again, my friend and colleague, Tony Ragunanan, is with us here. And I will share the conversation with him. So let me ask you the first question, Tony. What's been your experience with these conversations with the managers you've met in your practice?
Well, first of all, hello everybody, and thanks for joining us again. The first thing that we need to talk about with respect to conversations is the fact that we don't have them enough. For any relationship in the work environment to survive, we need to have the conversations. Now, in this podcast, we're just going to be focusing on 4 main types of conversations before we get into the characteristics and the structure of a conversation. The first type of conversation we are going to look at is the performance conversation. The second one would be, how do you have a conversation about unresponsive feedback? And the third, how do we have the conversation for emotional and physical well-being? And then the fourth is for how am I doing? So we'll start with the first one, the performance conversation. What can we say about this?
Every single category that you mentioned is in some form or another a performance conversation. There are different aspects, but one can be tied. The first one that you mentioned is tied directly to the goals and the expectations, I think, that we outlined at the beginning of the process.
Yes, and we spoke about this in the first one.
Yes, yeah. but I distinguish that, and I say this because all those conversations are performance conversations, but in different aspects. But that performance conversation that you just mentioned is the one that's tied directly to the expectations and the goals that we outlined at the beginning of this process. That should happen as often as possible, you think, but if the recommendation in the textbooks is that we should have at least a one-on-one conversation once a month, then let's start saying that we basically will have 12 conversations during the year. 12 one-on-one conversations. That's the context that I think it's very important. It's
right.
One-on-one. Yeah. It's not with a group of people. It's a private conversation between yourself and your employee.
But should it be scheduled like one per month? But it could happen more often than that. I mean, you should.
Absolutely.
Of course, it depends on what is happening with the employee at the time.
This is just a recommendation.
Yeah.
And I think that these conversations should be carried out whenever they're necessary, whenever either part feels it's necessary. Obviously, the brunt of the weight is carried by the leader. But it would be great if the employees would feel the psychological safety to initiate that conversation whenever they feel the need to do it as well. If it never happens, it's a good question for you as a leader to ask, why is that not happening?
Yes. Okay.
So that first conversation is that performance conversation. And by the way, I would also include in that conversation the development aspects of that employee.
Right, and that should happen throughout the year. This is because if you see some, and this is one of the challenges I see is that when we don't give the employee some feedback, some level of feedback, then at the end of the year, during the final performance appraisal, if they have it once a year, or depending on how often they have it, then it's too late to tell them, well, in notice in January you were doing this and that, just to have it right away. But then there is the second conversation is unresponsive feedback. What happens when you do give the feedback and you don't get a response?
I think it's important, Tony, and I don't know if you agree with me on this one, but it's important to distinguish feedback from the conversation. These are there are 2 forms to connect with your employee, and we'll talk about the feedback in the next podcast.
Right.
But there's a conversation that probably needs to take place if you feel that you're providing feedback in the daily work or the daily work context and you're not being responded well by that feedback. I think that's when you have to come back and say, okay, I need to have a conversation with this person concerning the feedback that remains unresponded to. So that's another kind. It's still performance, you see, but it's because I feel that my feedback is not being not being taken care of in the proper way. Does that make sense to you? I don't know.
Yeah, it does. It's just that sometimes you don't know what the reason is. So that is the nature of the conversation. I mean, how do we find out why am I not getting any why are they being unresponsive?
And that's why I think that's a very important type of conversation every leader should keep in mind, because if you feel that you're giving feedback and nothing is happening, something is going wrong. You should not keep on giving feedback if you're not being responded to it. So I need to talk about it. I mean, there are questions I need to ask about myself and my type of feedback, and what am I doing with the feedback I'm giving. But I will leave those details. I think we could talk about this on our next podcast, and we can share our thoughts on that as well. But it's a conversation to have because feedback is not being responded to, as you said.
Okay. So the third type is the emotional and physical well-being. Why is that important?
Have you ever had a conversation in your professional experience where a boss sat down and had this type of emotional or physical well-being conversation with you?
Again, that is rare. That sometimes come up to us and say, well, let me find out how you're doing. That sometimes doesn't happen. But it's important to explain that this is important for anybody. It's sort of a validation that we never grow out of, because as children, we hear this from our parents, but this is something we never grow out of. It's this having people ask us, well, how are you doing today? That is important.
Yes.
In the work environment.
I've looked in my past when I was working in the corporate world more than 23 years ago, and I cannot remember one instance when one of my bosses sat down and said, how do you feel? Do you like your job? What is it what's bothering you from your job? Are you feeling well? Is there something wrong? No, anything like that.
With any of these conversations, something always comes up, and that is emotions, which is one of the major characteristics and the role of emotions in conversations.
I don't know if you agree, but I think it's a crucial element. I think that most conversations, especially at the workplace, most conversations are carried with a lot of emotion. Most of this happens subconsciously. If you're working in an environment that you are not really happy with, or with a boss that you don't really like that much, or that you're hurt by, that emotion or those emotions are going to play a very important role in whatever conversations we have. So I think we should dedicate a couple of minutes on talking about how crucial emotions become in these conversations. They could be marring them. They could be, really being a huge obstacle in having productive conversations at the workplace.
Yes, because people come to work with all kinds of emotions. They sometimes bring their problems. And while we're on this topic, I mean, it's not just about managing emotions at work. It's managing emotions anywhere you are.
Sure.
You bring your work home. You bring your work home, and some people bring their home problems to work. What level of emotional intelligence do they need to have in order to function effectively?
Unfortunately, the level of emotional quotient out there is not that high.
No.
And all of us need to dedicate more time on questioning how well we manage our own emotions and how well we manage other people's emotions with us. But in the conversation, let me put it in the proper context, and you'll see what I mean. The first thing that I'm thinking, if you're my boss, Tony, and you say, Edwin, I want to talk to you about performance, let's have this one-on-one conversation, immediately I will go, uh-oh, and I will go to your conversation with a sense of defensiveness, okay? So right there, emotions are taking the front seat, and it'll block a good conversation. We should try to avoid having that happen, because I really think that when defensiveness pops up, the conversation is over. You cannot have a true...
But for me, doesn't the defensiveness come from the type of leader you have? I mean, if you told me you wanted to talk to me and we had a fairly good relationship in terms of a working relationship, would that emotion still come up as much?
Yeah, well, it's a two-sided question, because it could be that my type of leadership could provide you with that or not, But it also may be that my concept of a leader is that I should not talk to the person this way or that way, or I had to be careful because he has in his hands the power to fire me, and I need this job. And that's why we talk about psychological safety so often,
Right.
because people are fearful of the consequences of what they say to their bosses. So it goes both ways. It could be what I have provided in terms of trust as a leader, and also what the employee has in his mind as the true power that the leader has, and what consequences being honest and frank with them will have on me.
Okay.
So it goes both ways. But still, we have to think in terms of, okay, what emotions am I bringing into this conversation? Am I coming too strongly? If you see that the person becomes defensive, then you would have to ask yourself, what is it that I'm saying, or how am I saying it, that is provoking this person to become defensive with me? And I need to work that out. I have two choices: either do it at the moment and try to deal with it at that moment, if the other person can carry that conversation with you, or you stop it and then you go back and redo your rethink your conversations so you can go better prepared. Let us share with you a slide that I think is very important. It's a very important slide because it simply, in a very simple way, shows the importance of the managing of emotions and what the consequences is bringing. What choices do I have? It's taken out of the book from Stoker, Overcoming Fake Talk. What we have in that slide is, you see that red line in the middle that says choice, and then two big arrows, one going upwards and the other one going downwards. And Stoker, in his Dialogue Works book, talks about when you are in a situation and in a conversation and you feel the need to react, you should have you discipline yourself in such a way that you can stop before you react. Because if you simply react and you let it flow, you can see right there at the bottom side of the slide the things that happen, or what the dissolution happens, where you find disrespect and people are denying stuff or deferring, guilt, criticizing, justifying, blaming. All that takes place. That's the defensive side that I'm talking about. A lot of the conversations that take place between employee and employer, or leader and its employee, this is what happens. And we need to stop that and say, wait a minute, there's a moment when I can feel that I'm reacting emotionally to something. I need to put a stop on that consciously. And then instead of react, I should act, okay? Controlling my emotion so that I can actually try to ask questions about what I've just heard, listen to those questions, share what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling, learning about them, so that I can move that conversation towards an upward spiral or a resolution. It takes a lot of personal effort, and you have to find a spot where you're able to say, wait a minute, I am reacting to this. Let me put a stop on this and let me act. Let me take control of it. And instead of reacting, let me ask questions about it. And let me channel this to reason, so that instead of my emotions taking over, my reasons take over, and I can have a resolution instead of a dissolution. That's right. What that slide is all about. Every single conversation is a two-channel thing. One is the literal meaning of what I'm saying, and the other is the emotional meaning of what I'm saying. Or another way of saying it is, the intent of my conversation is carried through the emotional level. Your subconscious picks that information up from your facial expression, your tone of voice, your gestures. So it goes subconsciously, that is being processed while we're talking. And maybe you don't know it, but your facial expression is causing the person to become defensive. And you need to find out whether that's the case or not in order to fix that. Right. Sounds like a lot of work, but we do that almost every day automatically if you are conscious of it.
Well, that is the thing, is how conscious are we? Because most people are unconscious of their facial expressions. Some people just give off a sort of vibe, for lack of a better word, when they walk into a room. And I had that some years ago. I mean, I know of one person in particular who walked into a room and it changed the entire environment of the room. It just the expression on her face. And this expression on her face when we had conversations later on wasn't because of the work environment. It was because of something going on at home. So yes, having control of that emotion is important. But now we have to look at, in terms of preparing to speak to somebody, or preparing to have that conversation with somebody, what is the structure?
That's the first thing we need to do, obviously, because of the fact that emotions are so important in conversations. And when we say emotions, people think that it's a dramatic, intense emotion like being angry or being happy or euphoric. No. Emotions can be a lot lower than that, still make a very important part of our conversations. But we need to prepare precisely because we need to think about what type of person I'm dealing with here, or what kind of emotion is this person going to bring to this conversation? How can I deal with this person if this person becomes defensive? What kind of bias or prejudice am I bringing to this conversation, or this other person is bringing to this conversation? So there needs to be some kind of preparation.
Yes.
That's in the emotional side alone, but you also need to think in terms of the fact that each conversation that you carry, doesn't matter what type of conversation it is, I need to be able to identify a particular purpose for that conversation. What is it that I want to achieve in this conversation? And I think it's too simple to say, well, I just want to inform. No, I think a one-on-one conversation should carry a lot more weight than just to inform. These type of conversations carry out more weight than just informing. Informing tends to be one directional, and we need it to be a dialogue on both ways. So the preparation has to deal with the emotion, and has to deal with the intention. It has to deal with what kind of person am I going to talk to. It's not the same to talk to an employee who's grouchy or tends to be grouchy, or than to talk to a person that tends to be talkative. Two different types of characters or personalities, and I need to be aware of how am I going to manage this so that I can carry out my conversation, achieve my purpose or intention in that conversation without wasting too much time and without breaking the connection that we need.
Right. So on the topic of time, we also have to be aware of how we are adapting to the different personality types, because people have different personalities. I have to know, well, suppose you're not a morning person. Should I talk to you at that time?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a very good one.
Because that is something that when I was in the sales environment, I made conscious decisions to speak to people, certainly depending on the time of the day I felt they were in a better mood. I mean, and that is only from experience. So personalities play a role in deciding when you're going to have this conversation.
And it's funny because people take those elements for granted. But the truth of the matter is that you do it subconsciously. For example, you don't treat your neighbor the same way you treat your coworker because you know they're different, or you don't treat your pastor or your friend the same way you treat your boss. There's something in there that knows the difference. So a good leader really knows that you need to adjust your style, and with some people you need to adjust your style according to that. Some people have told me or asked me, isn't that being hypocritical? It has nothing to do with hypocrisy because I'm still being myself. I'm just adjusting my personality to the characteristics that I feel better connect with this person. Well, so that I'm trying to be something different.
So this is one of the things that we have to be mindful of, is that if we are trying to adapt our personality, we have to do the adapting, because we create the environment as leaders for the behavior that comes at us. And that is key for me.
You mean that it's the responsibility of the leader?
Yeah, should I depend on that person to change? No, that person is going to come with whatever they come with. But it's my responsibility to change how I come across to that person. Because then that could dictate the environment I offer.
But that means that as a leader or a good manager, you need to attune yourself to what the other persons are projecting and feeling and sensing. That's where the emotional intelligence part comes in.
Yes.
And that's the human side of this, really. That's where the most human side of this comes through. You have to learn how to read people, not to manipulate them, but to understand them better. And I think it's a basic need for good leadership to learn how to be sensitive to how other people are reacting, and being aware of other people's emotions, and how my emotions and their emotions are actually dancing here together to try to synchronize in some way. And you have to carry that responsibility. You should be an expert on doing this. And in my experience, Tony, I don't know if it's the same in yours. Most people forget most leaders. Most people don't invest consciously the time to develop that. It's there subconsciously, but you cannot manage it unless you bring it to the conscious level.
Yeah.
How that's done is a topic for another day, but
Yeah,
but it's important that
I think that in terms of the structure, so let me clarify. One is purpose. The other one is personalities. A third one, and this is something that we don't often know from the other person yet. But what are the expectations? Because we haven't had that conversation with them yet. And then with the barriers as well.
Yeah, two good points that we have to consider in our preparation for the conversation. So we have, the first thing is purpose. The second thing is personalities and the emotional elements involved. The third and fourth that you mentioned, the expectations. Yes, you can have a picture of the expectations because you are their leaders. You're their leader. You are their boss. So you probably know this person, but the final exact information you need about their expectations, you'll find out when you're in front of them. So some of that will take place at the moment. You need to learn how to develop this so that you
during
can
the conversation
understand. But you can anticipate what you expect from them, and you should have your expectations very clear, because I think that as part of a good structured conversation, one-on-one conversation like this, you need to let the person know openly what your expectations are. And the main reason for that is, Tony, that if you don't give your intention, your expectations up front, it could lead to a perception of manipulation. The difference between manipulation and persuasion is that in manipulation, your intent is hidden. But if you don't hide your intention or your expectations, you cannot be accused of being manipulative. No, this is what I want. This is what I expect. Let's talk about it. How do you feel about it? Tell me your side of it. But we miss that point most of the time. So even though we don't know the other person's expectation, you can infer a lot of it because you know them as a leader. Yet a lot of it will come through at the moment you sit in front of them.
Right. And what are some of the other barriers you think that could be present? Because for me, barriers, sort of everything that we have spoken about so far, it presents barriers. Whether it's the personality, purpose, maybe
yes.
lack of purpose, maybe the expectations have been clarified for the conversation. So it sort of goes all in one.
All of those could be barriers, of course, but yet there are others that are very obviously barriers. For example, someone who has a grudge against you.
Yes.
And they come to this conversation, but you know they're hurt by something that happened, and you know what it is, okay? So how do you overcome that in that conversation? How can you begin that conversation with this person knowing that they come with this block in front of them, or a certain baggage? You're not going to believe this, but I've had conversations in companies with people who are complaining to me about things that happened 10 and 15 years before in that company, and they're still hurt by it. Never been able to take it out, and they're still carrying that. That's a barrier right there. No one ever took the care to sit down and say, how are you feeling? What's bothering you?
Yeah, it's called baggage.
Yes. So there are many types of barriers like that. I don't know if you know, if you can think of any others, but that's a very obvious barrier right there.
Yes. And one of the, and I guess all of these things kind of roll into one, because now during the conversation, we are dealing with all of this. We are dealing with the emotional state. We're dealing with the clarity of intent, which would come from actual purpose. But we have to make sure as leaders that we listen and acknowledge what we are hearing from them. This for me is important. I mean, to acknowledge is,
yes.
Whether you agree with it or not, is important to listen to what they have to say. And
I think that's called active listening.
Yeah, active listening for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have found that in any human conversation, questions play an important, very important role. People who ask more questions are better connected with other people than those who simply are telling things. So why am I bringing this now? Because I think that active listening would be the proper, if I want to make a good conversation and ask good questions, the other side of that coin is then I need to listen carefully to the answers of those to those questions.
Yes.
So the best advice I could give a manager is ask questions, ask a lot of questions in these meetings, these one-on-one conversations, but then listen carefully to the answers. There's a lot of information there. Again, we go back to being attuned to develop that sensibility, that to see in their facial expressions, in their corporal language, in their tone of voice, what's going on in their minds, and let them know what you're observing. Let them know how you are feeling about this. Yes. Is there something worrisome like defensiveness? That's a red light. Talk about it. You know, I've sensed this, I've sensed that. Am I right about this? Because you're not always right about what you sense. It's always good to confirm it to the other person. Yeah. That kind of openness is very important. But that active listening, if it's not there, it means that we are not sincere or honest in the questions that we ask or the conversation that we're having.
Right.
Everybody likes to be listened.
Yeah, but I agree with you. Active listening is paying attention, giving support, and playback. The playback part is what people are not used to. And I don't think you have to do it when you're talking to your friends or whatever. You have a relationship already that many other things are understood. But when we are listening to people, I think the paying attention comes with body language. Giving support comes with what you are saying while the person is talking. Are you asking them to tell you more or whatever? But let me see if I understand what you're saying. It's like a playback. Do we say it enough, or do we do it enough?
We could be talking about that for 10 hours.
Yes.
Nonstop, because there's a lot going on in the conversation in the brain. And I know you've heard about mirror neurons.
Yes.
And how the mirror neurons on each brain are trying to connect with each other. So if I start talking to you softly, you will tend to lower your voice and speak softly to me as well.
Right.
You know, but if I look tense, you start looking tense subconsciously, because the mirror neurons work that way. And, right. and neuroscientists have known that since the 1990s, that is very clearly there. Right. Even when you're looking at a movie, your mirror neurons are you see someone crying in a movie, you could probably cry yourself.
Yeah.
Because they're that powerful, you know? Yes. But yes, that's how you know someone is paying attention. It's not just, you know, it's how I look at you, and it's how I conduct myself, it's how I answer back, and every time you say something and I say something back, even in the form of a question, it's reinforcing that I'm trying to really understand what's in your mind.
Yes.
I've given many of the managers I've dealt with in my life this cue, and I say, always try to find out what's in their minds. The people you're leading, you should be able to know what the people you're leading are thinking about, what's worrying them, what's not worrying them, yes. What's holding them back, what do they think about that. And that's why these conversations that we're talking about need to take place. Yes. They're not a waste of time. Time is not wasted when you do that.
Yes. No, I agree.
Not the main excuse.
Yes, I agree. And all of the things that we have spoken about, they happen all at the same time. It's not one after the other and then the other. It's just they happen all at the same time. But it has to be really a part of us to develop the habits to do that. And the only way you can develop habits is to really continue to do it so it becomes unconscious.
What kind of pushback do you get when you mention these things to a manager?
To a manager? I don't have time. Right?
The
main one. I don't have time. We don't have time to be talking to
I'll tell you what I answer when they say this.
Huh?
It's like, I'll tell you what I answer when they tell me this. I don't have time. That takes too much time. And I say, okay, it's like having children. And once you have them, you say, you know what? I don't have time to bring them up. Sorry. You know, do your homework, grow up, that's your duty. I don't have time to deal with you. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that employees are children. I'm saying that it's the same type of responsibility, you know?
Yes.
if you don't want to do that, you should not be a leader. You should not be a manager,
Yes,
especially the kind of manager that leads people. I really think that, and I'm quoting other people here, this is not an original idea of mine, but there are many gurus out there that talk about that. And they say, if you do not like to deal with people, you should not be in management.
Yes.
I mean, there are certain type of managers that don't deal directly with or don't lead, but you still have to deal with other managers.
Right. At least
what are you doing there if you cannot manage people?
Yeah, it's probably easier in Spanish because the Spanish word for people is gente.
Yes. That's funny because it's a rhyme in Spanish.
Yes.
Because people is gente in Spanish and manager is gerente. So what I usually say is, si no puedes bregar con gente, no puedes ser gerente. So if you cannot deal with people, you cannot be a manager. But it rhymes in Spanish. And it's a very powerful statement when it rhymes.
All right, good.
And it's not that I'm telling people don't be a manager, but if you really want to be a leader and a manager, it's about managing people. That's why in my practice, I've come to call myself a people management consultant, because it's about people. Yes, you have to reach your goals, but it's through people that you have to reach the goals. These conversations are crucial. These conversations are so important. You have to learn how to develop this sensibility. And it's not being a flake. I'm not saying that you need to be a softie. You could be a very determined and firm person and yet be sensible or sensitive to these things, because I think that defines you as a leader. So that connection naturally goes there. It's not being weak. I'm not talking about being weak. I can tell you, I can be very stern with you and still be very human. That takes art and science.
Yes. I agree. Yeah, so I think it's important to really understand the dynamics, of the conversation, and make the choice to get it done. Because I think just like if you're coaching somebody, the first thing is awareness. It's awareness of the need to have the conversation, taking the responsibility for it, and then making a choice to do it. It's really, and the rest of it for me is just practicing it. And the more conversations you have, the more you will be able to develop the relationships with your direct reports, develop trust, and then coaching, feedback, everything becomes easier after you take the time to do that.
Just commit to have them and learn from them as you move along. But you have to commit to have them. As we said, not having time for them is not an excuse. That's totally unacceptable.
Yes.
You have to rethink what you're doing with your time if that's the case. But I think we need to commit to them and the quality of them. In other words, it's not just having the conversation. It's what I do with it, how I manage that conversation.
Yes.
Again, I've had some managers say, "Oh, I talked to them." Check. I did it. Check the check mentality.
But I think the quality depends on the time you take to prepare for it.
That's where part of the quality is, definitely.
Yes.
Now, my delivery is important, but my delivery is contingent to the preparation I had. So you're right. So, it takes time. It does. It takes a bit of time. But it's the type of time that actually will help. The more you do it, the less time it will take.
Yes.
Just like becoming sensitive to other people, it's hard at first because you have to force yourself to go into your subconscious and try to find, what am I thinking here? What are my emotions doing here? What are my biases doing here? But after a while, when you get used to it, after a lot of practice, just like when you're getting rid of old habits, you have to push the new ones in order for those to become habits. With practice, they become, and sometimes you can have a conversation like this in 20 minutes. They don't have to be that long if you know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, so I hope that the viewers could take something from it and just make changes along the way. You don't have to change everything at the same time, but work on one thing at a time, and eventually you'll be better at it.
Sure, and our next conversation will be focused on providing feedback. The dynamics of particular feedback, which is a form of communication, but different from this one-on-one.
Okay. All right, good. Okay, Edwin.
See you next time.
Thanks a lot.
Yep.